The one that's about touchdown is on an 8-mile final for 3-1 center. He's at 2800 descending now. Report him in seconds.
Okay, flight 530, we'll go 3003.
Yeah, you, I don't know if you can say, but you're heading towards the approach?
Yeah, it seems to have sat down for now, but right now we're heading your direction.
Very good, sir. I'll keep you apprised. Twin 530, if you will, remain north of the final 3-1 center. Let me know when you have to cross it. We'll make it work.
Yeah, it seems to have sat down for now, but right now we're heading your direction.
Very good, sir. I'll keep you apprised. Twin 530, if you will, remain north of the final 3-1 center. Let me know when you have to cross it. We'll make it work.
Flight 530, we'll go.
Beautiful home in Blue Point. This home has to be at least $250,000.
I hope so. 3/4.
Or $750,000, whatever. And I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Why don't you start with what Montauk was about, how it tied into Philadelphia experiment.
A brief synopsis, maybe, of the...
Okay, first of all, I got to find the
However, you want to start with Philadelphia and then go to however you want.
how it ties in.
I first have to find the power cord. I got to plug the power cord and start up the paper.
Go.
There, plugged in. All right, way back when. Let's start with the Phoenix Project. Phoenix Project is a carry-on from the Philadelphia Experiment.
Can you hear them? Can you hear them okay?
That was a silly little project that the Navy did back in the 30s and the 40s, attempting to make a battleship invisible. They wanted to make an aircraft carrier invisible. They threw the switch one eventful day, and the ship went into hyperspace, caused all sorts of problems to the people on the boat. Navy said the thing's a huge failure, it's a huge success, but it's also a huge failure, and they shelved it. In about 47, it was decided, the government can't leave this thing alone. They got a wild effect that they wanted to study. So in 47, they reopened it and started up with what we came later to know as the Phoenix Project. It was originally the Rainbow Project. It was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories, and Dr. von Neumann and all his associates, this was long before any of us were involved in it, started to replicate this thing. Out of the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. Either of these two guys could talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic living toys, such as radio sound. What is a radio sound? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it, that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing up in the atmosphere at once. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will ultimately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And the switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the height by what they call the baro switch. This thing used a very unusual type of pulse modulation. In most cases, they used a CW, continuous wave oscillator, and pulsed the thing off. The pulse was pulsing it off. This turned out to be a very switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. Either of these two guys would talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic living toys, such as radio sound. What is a radio sound? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it, that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing in the atmosphere. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will ultimately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And they shelved it. In about 47, it was decided, the government can't leave this thing alone. They got a wild effect because they wanted to study. So in 47, they reopened it and started up with what we came later to know as the Phoenix Project. It was originally the Rainbow Project. It was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories. And Dr. von Neumann and all his associates, this was long before any of us were involved in it, started to replicate this thing. Out of the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. Either of these two guys can talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic moving toys, such as radio songs. What is a radio song? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it, that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing up in the atmosphere at once. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will ultimately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And the switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the height by what they call the baro switch. This thing used a very unusual type of pulse modulation. In most cases, they used a CW, continuous wave oscillator, and pulsed the thing off. The pulse was pulsing it off. This turned out to be a very efficient conversion of electrical energy to etheric energy. Now, I very recently started collecting radio songs. I don't know why, but I did. I walked in with a radio song, and one of the associates at Space-Time Laboratory says, things are a weather control device. So, of course, that piqued my interest. I'd already known that the humidity sensor was terrible. Its accuracy was a lot to be desired. I'd known the temperature sensor was terrible. Its accuracy had a lot to be desired. And the other unusual thing that I wondered about is, I can get all the radio songs I want, but I've never ever seen a receiver for them. So, we first did a quote-unquote psychic reading. See, Space-Time Laboratories, everybody uses CAD, computer-aided designs. At Space-Time Laboratories, we use psychic-aided design. So we had a number of different psychics read on the radio songs. Weather control device, doorbuster, door-going enhancer. That's the readings that came through. So I got very interested, and I started to ask around about radio songs. The next thing I found out by word of mouth is these things were designed at Brookhaven National Laboratories up in Long Island, New York, and just up the road from this place. And I started to talk to people I know at Brookhaven. Ran across a retired gentleman from Brookhaven who wishes to remain nameless, so I won't name him. He'll stay anonymous. He told me that the design was originally done by a character by the name of Wilhelm Reich. Of course, that piqued my interest even more. Wilhelm Reich. The story goes that in about 47, Mr. Reich handed the U.S. government a weather control device, a little package that would do door busting. He felt that if he could reduce the amount of door and increase the orgone in the storm wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't have wind, and it wouldn't do the damage. It would be a less violent storm.
What is the DOR?
Deadly orgone. Dead orgone. That's the bad stuff.
And where does it come from?
No one really knows where it comes from. I've heard a number of theories. Well, essentially, orgone can be considered like live energy, energy from life forces, energy from living beings. Dead orgone is any type of energy but dead. It doesn't have any life in it. It has a tendency to decrease life functions. It reduces life functions. So the government took this little widget that Mr. Wright handed them. He told them, put it on a balloon, send it up. Well, say for a parachute on it, they didn't want the thing coming down with a big, loud, crashing bang through somebody's skylight, and the government gets sued for all sorts of money. And they send the thing up into a bad storm, and it gets reduced in intensity tremendously. So the government goes back to Reich and says, hey, we like the thing. So they launched another part of the Phoenix project where they designed these radio sounds. This is almost like a little subsection of this, by the way, this story. Now, of course, I dug further and further into it. I already noted, I talked of the receiver. There are instances where we know they launched these things from over sea, every airport, every weather station, planes. At one point in the 50s, there must have been maybe 200 to 500 of these things launched every day. The radio range, being a radio person, I can tell you about that, I checked it. The radio range on these transmitters, even up in the air, maybe is 100 miles. But that means when they launch one of these frequencies, there has to be a receiver close by. They're going to send up a data transmitter and have a receiver. That means if they're sending 200 or more of these things up each day, that would be one pile of a receiver. These receivers should be very common. Now, I happen to be a receiver collector. I have over 100 receivers in my personal collection of receivers. I have never seen a radio sound receiver. I've heard them, but I've never seen one. I got almost every other receiver that was used in the 40s and the 50s by the military.
Of course, what is the center to that modulation on frequency?
403 megahertz and 1680 megahertz. They use two different frequencies.
They're both on simultaneously? They're both on simultaneously?
No, it's one of the other.
One for primary and one for secondary?
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403.
They're both on simultaneously?
No, it's one of the other.
One for primary and one for secondary?
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403. The later
exactly?
plus or minus 2 megahertz. And the later ones are on 1680 plus or minus about 6 megahertz.
They were precipitated or?
No, they were just free running oscillators. The 400 megahertz, I was going to get into the details, technical details, how the radio sound works. But this is a good time to go into that. I don't have any illustrative materials, so I'll have to attempt to describe to you people how the circuitry works. It's a very unique system that they have. Essentially, the temperature element was a thermostat pipe. It is negatively varies resistance with the temperature. As the resistance goes up, as the temperature goes up, the resistance goes down. Now, I had a mass spectrograph done on one of these thermostats and I compared it to a YSI thermostat. They both have carbon. They both are essentially carbon, but the radiosonde thermostat had some silver in it, had some gold in it, had some platinum in it, had some iridium. I don't remember the other two elements. Huh?
They both on simultaneously?
No, it's one or the other.
One for primary and one for secondary.
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403. The later exactly. I don't have any illustrative materials up to attempt to describe to you people how the circuitry works. It's a very unique system that they have. Essentially, the temperature element was a thermistor pipe. It is a negatively varying resistance with the temperature. As the resistance goes up, as the temperature goes up, the resistance goes down. Now, I had a mass spectrograph done on one of these thermostats and compared it to a YSI thermostat. They both have carbon. They both are essentially carbon, but the radiosonde thermostat had some silver in it, had some gold in it, had some platinum in it, had some iridium. I don't remember the other two elements. It has a fair amount of silver in it. Silver was about 10% my weight. Now, for a thermistor, it's not going to make it any more accurate. If anything, it's going to make the curve go really straight. You deal with metals like that. Of course, you read Wilhelm Reich literature, you'll find that Reich used sensors. What they call a barrel switch, or a pressure-sensitive cycling switch. As the thing would rise, the pressure would change, and the needle in the little barometer would go across a switch segment, with the segments of a switch. That drove a relay. that would in sequence put either the temperature or the humidity sensor back and forth. It would switch between these two sensors. Then it would switch to, which I'll explain in a minute how it's done, to what they call a reference mode in the transmitter. So what they have, as this thing rises and goes above the earth, it transmits a signal that destroys the door, and also transmits a signal after that, or before, however you look at it, that builds up the orgone energy. Now, let's consider the transmitter. The transmitter is a very interesting little beast. It is two oscillators. An oscillator that runs at the carrier frequency of 403 megahertz or 1680 megahertz. There's a second oscillator, which is a 7 megahertz.
The strings run through a TCA 350 bucket brigade delay IC internally for an ensemble effect, but there's no front panel settings to switch that on or off or change its speed or depth. But it creates a really distinctive sound, particularly in the lower register, and this is what string synths are famous for. Now, the classic thing to do with strings is add some phaser, so I'm going to use my Highlight Phaser Mark II for that. Questi archi col phaser vengono direttamente dal paradiso. Next we have brass, which is also affected by the vibrato and sustain, but that has its own voltage control filter with a two-stage envelope, emphasis, which is resonance, and contour, which is envelope amount. There was originally a foot pedal to control emphasis, but this multi-man came without it, so we'll have to make do. Next we have a very limited piano that sounds not much like a piano, but that at least has some character. There's an additional sustain control for it via the foot switch. We also have a pluckier clavichord sound. And finally we have one more bonus sound. Bass. This is only available for the left hand and just has a volume control, although it's also affected by the sustain pedal and LFO.
Hyperspatial signal, the orgone is already differentiated. It can't do anything. It's 90 degrees out of phase to begin with. This integration network brings it back in phase for the transmitter to transmit it. Now, also, you have to keep in mind that when the tube goes from a semi-saturated mode, as it is when the carrier oscillator is oscillating, the cutoff, there are other things taking place from the zero-point potential. When the tube is cut off, any of the etheric signal that's stored in the tube be pushed out the antenna. Also, when you cut the tube off, and you go from saturation to cutoff, and from cutoff to saturation again, you're essentially ripping open the vacuum from the viewpoint of the Dirac space that he derived in the 30s. And you'll get an amplification. These transmitters only put out about a half a watt of CWRF power. The etheric content, or the non-real power, was equivalent to about 250 watt transmitter. That's how efficient these little things work.
Can you describe the phase relationship between the RF copper tower and the etheric tower and the frequency difference?
Okay, the frequency should be the same. The phase relationship.
Cosine? The cosine function?
Let's see, what will it be? It would have to be, let's see, it would come out of the differential equation relating the baseband to the carrier frequency. I think it'd be a tangent. I think it's a tangent function.
It would rise sharply
Yeah.
until the next cycle.
Mm-hmm. That tells you that it sends out the etherics in bursts. In other words, when this transmitter runs, the CW part of it, when the oscillator is on, it doesn't have much etheric. But at the point where the oscillator shuts off, it sends out a huge burst of etheric signal. That's your tangent time. I just had to think for a minute of what it would be, the question you answer your question.
I have a totally different question. Who was in charge of this project, of this door bus? What department was the government?
This was under United University's Brookhaven National Lab that was eventually turned over to the Signal Corps. But most of these things were U.S. Army Signal Corps stuff. Even the one set up from the Weather Service was Signal Corps. The Signal Corps had ultimate charge of it.
So as you're talking about this whole system, how does that now get into what was happening in the 40s and the 80s?
Okay. Okay, let's finish this off a little. Where was I? Questions always break the train of thought.
You were describing basically
Alright, the government could not tell the public that these things were weather control devices. They were keeping them secret. How'd they guard the secret? Two ways. They first showed a few receiving stations constructed to receive these things, put out that line. The personnel that launched them were laboriously calibrated. Thirdly, the special tube that's in the radiosondes, they would list in the tube manual as a whole bunch of baloney. Essentially, they'd be saying that only a few hours of light. That means that the ham over there picked one up, looked at the tube manual, the 7533 is only going to last a few hours, he's not going to use it. And that worked very well. As I already mentioned, I've never seen a receiver. That says they didn't use a receiver with these things. This is why, this is the hard data, besides the psychic data I base that the story is correct. Alright, what we're seeing here actually is in actuality the genesis of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was Phoenix 2. The Montauk Project is a combination of Wilhelm Reich's work and the Philadelphia experiment. There was like two separate little projects going on in Phoenix 1. You had the development of the invisibility and its human factor study. Also, you had the development of Wilhelm Reich's weather control. Yeah, that's Phoenix 1, and they converged. Towards the end of the Phoenix Project, by using some of Wilhelm Reich's concepts and some of the modulation schemes gleaned from the Radiosonde Project, coupling I know you're looking puzzled. This is what I found last week. Coupling that to the equipment that was used on the boat in the later invisibility project, they found out to couple the two, you now could use this for mind control. I'm not saying mood alteration. I know government circles around have me say mood alteration. Here I'm calling a spade or a spade. Mind control. That's what these idiots were doing. They're not actually idiots. That's what these people were doing.
That's what the Montep project was?
No, the Phoenix 1.
Phoenix 1.
The end of Phoenix 1, of course, what happened? Congress, the political government heard, hey, these guys are playing with mind control. They don't want that. So they told them, hey guys, cut it out. We don't want you looking into mind control. That's a no-no. So of course, the project was stopped. It was shut down. Does anyone here think it was really shut down? No, of course not. The people that were running this project went to the military and said, hey, we got this neat little project going. We can eventually use this to influence the mind of the enemy to give up and to surrender. We need a place to do this. We got to do this undercover now. So of course the military, they love the enemy. You know, they love something for a switch and the enemy puts down all their weapons and comes up hands in the air. They love this. So the military was sold a bill of goods, and the military was said, okay, you can use the old Montauk Air Force Base. It's dead as derelict. Also, some of the equipment you requested is on that base, the old Sage radar. So the base was shut down, everything was auctioned off, but the Sage radar was left behind. And the whole group moved from the Brookhaven Labs out to Montauk. That's Phoenix 2. Of course, they spent the first 10 years, from about 1969 to about 1979, researching pure mind control. They started out by taking the output of the Sage radar, modulating it in special ways that they came up with that Rankin showed them from the weather control process, and combining that with stuff they noticed from the Philadelphia experiment work and the stealth work. And they were hitting these poor bastards with the microwave beam out of the Sage transmitter direct. Those transmitted at about 400 megahertz, 406 megahertz, I believe most of them was set up. But hop around frequency a little, there were changing phase, there was pulse modulator, they used the infradyne concept where you have many stages, pulse modulator, usually pulse slightly different, but they're forming the final stage. You know, it's a pulse rate, was anywhere from 10 cycles to about 750 cycles. The pulse width, depending upon how they load up the capacitors, the voltage could be varied anywhere from about 10 microseconds to about 75 microseconds. The sending frequency was 406 megahertz, generated from cellular type function, which was referenced from the zero time function. There's a number of modulations, phase modulation, there was frequency hopping mode. Now this was also when I got on the station. And first trying to account what I'm doing and citing and even talking to different people, told us was the genesis of this thing. Let's keep all the technical questions for later. Okay? Again, we had technology. Phoenix 2, then you would start in 950. Yeah, about 69, 70, 71, somewhere.
He was one away from basically the
38 to 68, to 58. Now, some showed the first part of the mind control project, the back individual that just dumped in here, and maybe 250 feet away from the antenna. But I started to get into what the city's radar is capable of. The city's radar has a peak pulse power of a half a megawatt. That's in the antenna. The antenna had a gain of about 30 dB. So it means you're a megawatt